Hello and welcome to today's broadcast. Dang it. Let's try that again. I'm Davina. Ta-da! So welcome. We're going to be talking about debunking Ultra MAGA, and we're going to listen to Merrick Garland briefly issue a debunking, a riposte to Senator John Kennedy of Kentucky, I believe. Is it Kentucky? Or am I just saying that because he's Kennedy? We'll find out. We always do. But yes, in the meantime, I'll press play so we can have a listen. This is 1 minute and 22 seconds of, it's Louisiana, of Senator John Kennedy accusing Merrick Garland of stifling free speech, intimidating parents because of Merrick Garland's response to the escalating threats against public officials made during COVID after the Biden administration came to office, and disinformation agents of chaos really helped whip up certain gullible people into a frenzy of opposition against public safety measures, particularly in relation to schools and vaccines, all manner of things of that nature. Measures issued in an attempt to reduce the number of deaths and the collective amount of suffering. But yes, there were certainly a lot of threats, people being stalked, public officials having people with bullhorns outside their homes, frightening their children, issuing death threats, and just generally accusing public health officials of being instruments of the New World Order. La la la. Let's have a listen.
Didn't you understand the chilling effect that it would have to parents when you issued your directive, when you directed your criminal divisions and your counterterrorism divisions to investigate parents who were angry at school boards and administrators during COVID?
So, Senator, if you just give me a moment to put the full context, I did not do that. I did not issue any memorandum directing the investigation of parents who were concerned about their children. Quite to the contrary, the memorandum that you're talking about says at the very beginning of the memorandum that vigorous public debate is protected by the First Amendment. And the kind of concerns that you're talking about are, as expressed by parents, are of course completely protected. The memorandum was aimed at violence and threats of violence against a whole host of school personnel. It was not aimed at parents making complaints to their school board. And it came in the context of a whole series of other kinds of violent threats and violence against other public officials.
Well, so I do enjoy listening to someone clearly rebuke and rebut disinformation. So, of course, it's a strategy of the corrupt. I'm going to call them banana Republicans today. And I'll soon define banana republic for people. I had to look it up myself to be more clear on the topic. But it's a strategy of banana Republicans to weaponize any issue by turning it on its head and using it in an accusatory fashion. So the threats of violence against public officials and school board members were a direct consequence of the lies promulgated on right-wing media and adopted and platformed by right-wing politicians who lied about the way that COVID was a threat. COVID continues to be a potential threat, as all diseases are, but it was a pandemic level of threat for which at various stages of the pandemic's progression, there was no yet vaccines, and there was not a lot that people could do to protect themselves other than participate in group measures such as keeping their children home from school and availing themselves of any online learning resources. And that was to reduce the risk that more lives would be lost, to reduce the risk of harm. So I want to circle back and define Banana Republic for everybody. When I looked it up on Wikipedia, Banana Republic is it's a political science term, and it's used to describe a politically and economically unstable country with an economy dependent upon the export of natural resources, such as bananas. And it was coined by the American author O. Henry in 1904, who used the term to describe Honduras and neighboring countries that were being economically exploited by U.S. corporations such as the United Fruit Company, which is now Chiquita. Is that a banana company? I believe Chiquita is famous for selling bananas. So typically, a banana republic has a society of extremely stratified social classes. Stratified meaning in layers. So usually a large impoverished working class and a ruling class plutocracy composed of elites, business, political, and military elites. The ruling class controls the primary sector of the economy by the way of exploitation of labor. So therefore, the term banana republic is a pejorative or a negative descriptor for a servile oligarchy. Now, servile meaning servant-like, oligarchy meaning a power structure with a pyramid type of structure that has a powerful elite at the top, a small number of powerful elite and a larger number of people working in a way that's dominated by the oligarchy, the high-ups. So Banana Republic, a pejorative. I love the word pejorative. It's fun. It means negative. If there's anyone out there who's curious, a pejorative descriptor for a servile oligarchy, pyramid type of elite rule imposition that abets and supports, aids, supports for kickbacks the exploitation of large-scale plantation agriculture, especially banana cultivation. So that sounds a little bit like various US companies imposing a power structure that was reminiscent of how America initially generated extraordinary wealth and geopolitical influence on the world stage through that wealth by having some people, a smaller number of people, impose their will on a larger number of people who then did the physical labor of harvesting agricultural resources, agricultural products. So Banana Republic, small nations that find themselves oppressed by oppression in a US style form of agricultural dominance, agriculturally dominated industry dominated by an oppressive elite, bossing other people around to make a lot of money through the sale of food items. All right. So we looked at Merrick Garland debunking Senator John Kennedy, who was just giving voice to a common strategy employed by Republicans to say, oh, we are being oppressed. If the Attorney General of the United States issues a memorandum saying violent threats against public officials, violent threats against teachers, violent threats against school board members, and scaring the family members of public officials will not be tolerated and will be investigated and prosecuted, because violent threats are still a form of violence. They're psychologically oppressive. They disrupt people's lives. They mentally harm their children and their family members and harm the public officials themselves. So just because Merrick Garland issued a memorandum saying violent threats are unacceptable, that in no way, shape, or form was outside of the First Amendment. that in no way, shape, or form was counter to the principle of the First Amendment relating to free speech and the protected nature of free speech according to the US Constitution, or within the US constitutional framework. So let's see what else is up on the agenda to be discussed today, because lots of things happen. Honestly, so many things. I bookmark things that I wish to bring to people's attention. The historic Congressional Cemetery in Washington news item is closing tonight out of an abundance of caution because there's a block party being held outside the DC jail this evening by supporters and relatives of Capitol siege defendants. So these are family members of insurrectionists, and they're participating in a group effort to rehabilitate the image of the people who violently tried to overthrow the system of democracy in the United States, to replace the results of a free and fair election with an unelected tyrant, namely Donald Trump, who encouraged people to contribute to his plan of subverting the Constitution, falsely activating a section of the Constitution that refers to disputed election results, not even disputed. If there's a candidate who's not the clear winner, then you can throw the election question to the House of Representatives, specifically one delegate from each state. And Donald Trump wanted to activate that constitutional provision, knowing that Republicans outnumbered Democrats in terms of one delegate per state, that he would have 26 votes for president if the voting was all thrown out and this provision was activated in its place. I've forgotten which part of the Constitution it's from again. Dang it, I'll have to look it up. Okay, constitutional provision for no clear presidential election result. So the thing was, there was a clear election result in 2020. President Joe Biden won not only the popular vote, but he won 302 electoral college votes relative to 240 for Donald Trump. Yes, he won it. Oh, it's the 12th Amendment of the Constitution. Here we go. Election of president and vice president. Okay, so the 12th Amendment, the person having the greatest number of votes for president shall be president, if such number be a majority of the whole number of electors appointed. And if no person have such majority, then from the persons having the highest numbers, not exceeding 3, so the top 3 contenders for the presidency, on the list of those voted for as president, the House of Representatives shall choose immediately by ballot the president. The representation, but in choosing the president, the votes shall be taken by states. I'm reading from the Constitution here. The representation from each state having 1 vote. So 1 vote per state. So it doesn't matter about the fact that the Democrats had a majority of representatives in the House at that stage in 2020. It would have only mattered that there would have been more Republican-dominated states with Republican state legislatures who could have nominated 1 Republican elector from each of their states, numbering 26 in total to 24 Democratic votes. Donald Trump would have won a phony second election if Trump had been successful in activating this provision contained within the 12th Amendment of the Constitution, governing how the presidency is determined. Because it wouldn't have been validly activated because Biden did win a majority of the votes at the level of electoral college voters. He had a majority of electors appointed, legitimately appointed. Trump's legal strategy fomented by Jeffrey Clark, fomented by John Eastman, fomented presumably also by Michael Flynn, the traitorous seditionist former general, who's, I presume everybody knows, is a Christian nationalist working backstage trying to exploit some people's beliefs that America should be an exclusively Christian nation, that there should be a dominance of Christianity in politics, that there should be an end to a separation of church and state. So that plotting was to achieve the result of erecting a veneer of legitimacy to say, this is an amendment of the Constitution. It says, let's read the bit again, if no person have such majority. So the person having the greatest number of votes for president shall be the president, if such number be a majority of the whole number of electors appointed. And, so this is like the tie provision, and if no person have such majority. So the framers wrote into the Constitution a provision for nobody having a majority. Only 2020, Biden did. Trump wanted to make it muddy the waters so much that he could say, we need to activate this provision from the Constitution. Look, it's legitimate. I'm just being true to the Constitution. If no person have such majority, then from the persons having the highest numbers not exceeding 3 on the list of those voted for as president, top 3 candidates, the House of Representatives shall choose immediately by ballot the president. He wanted to throw the election to the House of Representatives, knowing that Republicans would have a majority in a 1 elector per state scenario, that they had 26 Republican governed states. Because the number of electoral college votes isn't just determined by number of states, there's a bit of a proportional effect with, this is a bigger state, so they can have a few more representatives in the House of Representatives. So Democrats had the majority in 2020, but Republicans had a majority of state numbers, purely just at state numbers. Does that make sense? I hope everybody gets this. I want it to be discussed more. I want it to be understood more, that it wasn't just a rabble crowd. They were the rabble crowd that Trump incited, the insurrectionists, the people who injured more than 140 police officers on the day of January the 6th, were part of a broader overarching strategy to install Trump as an unelected dictator who could no longer be held accountable through elections, who would dominate in a scenario of failure to uphold the American election system. Donald Trump wanted to create that failure using a multi-pronged approach, violent attack on the Capitol to pressure legislators and to disrupt the element of the Constitution that says the results must be certified on January the 6th. It's a provision of the Constitution. He wanted to say, oh, look, there's been some turbulence, so it's all too muddy, it's all too contentious. Therefore, we're activating that part of the Constitution that says, if no person have such majority. He wanted to make that the case. He wanted to make everything so muddy that people just accepted, okay, fine. It's too contentious. There was this big riot. There's lawyers who say, constitutional scholars who have lent their reputations to this argument that which amendment is it again? The 12th Amendment. A provision in the 12th Amendment needs to be activated. We're being legitimate. We're just throwing the election now to the House of Representatives. I can bring that up on screen, actually, because I think it's important people see that I am using sourced information and that this is the same thing that Donald Trump was hoping to rely on, that Donald Trump and his seditious allies. So I'm visiting a website called constitutioncenter.org, the Constitution /amendments/amendment-XII, which is the Roman numerals for 12. This is the 12th Amendment. Literally, this is the Constitution. This is the highlighted passage that I was reading from. The representation from each state having 1 vote. Ta-da! That was the goal. That was the scheme. I'll make it bigger. Everybody should know. The January 6 rioters, the insurrectionists, the violent people who continually are coming to trial and receiving sentences of varying degrees, the people who are consuming a vast amount of taxpayer resources in all of the workings of the judicial system to bring about justice in relation to this matter and hopefully deter other people from attempting to violently overthrow American democracy. Oh, Christopher's looking at his miniature copy of the Constitution. Excellent work, Christopher. I've got mine here as well. Where's mine? Okay, no, maybe I've moved mine. Well, I normally have it. Anyway, look, do you like my paper flowers that I have today? Dun, dun. All right. So I hope everybody's seen that. Confirmed that, yes, Trump's plan, use false grounds for activating the 12th Amendment of the Constitution, throw the election, scrap the results of the actual election, and constitute a new election to be held by the House of Representatives writing down who they would like to be president. So, yes, so that is my goal, is to increase awareness of the composite nature of Trump's plan, incite violence, use a veneer of legal legitimacy and constitutional argument to scrap American democracy, the results of an American election, and thereby bring about a peaceful transition to a despotic rule, that America would have had an unelected president, a very obviously illegitimate unelected president, which would have been very destabilizing to the United States because a lot of people would have had problems with it. But Donald Trump was, I presume, also hoping that the military would back him if they bought that argument that he was just using the 12th Amendment of the Constitution and it was all fair and legitimate because there was such a question of legitimacy hanging over the disputed 2020 election results. And as we have much more evidence backing us now, the people pushing that on their audience knew it was a lie. The Dominion defamation lawsuit against Fox News has, in the process of discovery, identified that Rupert Murdoch was admitting. They were all discussing amongst themselves how they didn't buy for a minute Donald Trump's claims that the election was fraudulent. They didn't believe Sidney Powell saying that Hugo Chavez had programmed the Dominion voting machines to throw out votes for Donald Trump and out of thin air fabricate votes for Joe Biden. They thought it was implausible. They thought it was ludicrous. They knew that one of Sidney Powell's sources was a lady who emailed her claiming to be a decapitated ghost who had been told that Joe Biden had stolen the election. Have you read that in the news? Honestly, Sidney Powell was without admitting that her source was an email from a lady who said, "I hear whispers. I am a ghost without a head, but I feel that my knowledge is true." Let's find that news article and read it, actually, because it's quite special. Okay, Sidney Powell. She had forwarded this email. Sidney Powell, Donald Trump's lawyer, who was renowned for being not just left of field, but extremely committed to saying insane sounding things, extremely committed to pushing insane sounding arguments that didn't pass the come on man test. Sidney Powell, decapitated ghost is what I'm going to. Oh, good. NPR have an article on it. And that's always nice because, you want to use your best, most reputable sources that you can. So here we go. The Wackadoodle Foundation of Fox News election fraud claims. So basically, I'll also throw in a mention of the fact it's been exposed that Rupert Murdoch sent Biden's ads, political ads, that hadn't appeared yet on television when he was campaigning for the presidency. They sent Rupert Murdoch sent those ads to Jared Kushner and what he knew of Biden's debate strategy. So he's very much a Republican campaign facilitator, leaking strategy from the Democrats that he has, because he's supposed to be an impartial, fair and balanced news purveyor, but he's taking what he's got from Biden's ads that he's paid for to be on Fox and leaking them to Biden's rival, Donald Trump, Donald Trump's family, Jared Kushner, his son-in-law, in preview form before they've aired on television, giving an advantage to Donald Trump. So, wow, it's so good that Donald Trump still lost, even with all of this help, even with Rupert Murdoch actively working to elect Republicans. Anyway, let's go to the decapitated ghost story. The Wackadoodle Foundation of Fox News election fraud claims. Maria Bartiromo. So she was sent that email from Sidney Powell. So she knew that the woman Sidney Powell was using as a source was someone who was so departed from sanity that she claimed to be a decapitated ghost. Okay. A woman who says the wind talks to her and put forth claims of election fraud in the 2020 presidential race that she admitted were pretty wackadoodle, turns out to be a key source of allegations that Fox News presented night after night to millions of viewers late that fall. Joe Biden's victories caused Fox News personalities to all but melt down on the air. Off the air, a sense of crisis pervaded the private conversations of the network's executives and stars. Viewers who supported then-President Donald Trump abandoned Fox in droves after its election night team became first in the nation to project that Biden would win the pivotal state of Arizona. So good on that man. He was fired, the election forecaster dude. I find his name because he was honorable. Forecaster, Arizona victory. Fired. These are the keywords I'm using to Google and remind myself of that man's name. Oh no, that's New York Times. I'm not going to be able to read that. Chris Steyerwalt, the veteran politics editor who was an on-screen face of the network's election night projection that Joseph Robinette Biden Jr. had defeated President Trump in Arizona, according to 3 people with knowledge of the matter. Fox News was the first news outlet to call Arizona for Mr. Biden. Okay, so Chris Steyerwalt, that's the hero I'm talking about, which is not a term I usually use to employ to Fox employees, but he was fired for having some integrity. There you go. Oh, I was fired from my job. He's written a first-person primary source piece for Politico magazine as well that says, I was fired from my job on the desk after calling the election for Biden in 2020. The funny thing is I should have seen it coming, by Chris Steyerwalt. He wrote in 2022. Yeah, that's going to be an interesting one. I might read some of that out soon. But in the meantime, we're still on this. We'll go back to this NPR article that takes us through the story of what happened. So Chris Steyerwalt, who was later fired, was responsible for telling Fox News viewers that it looked like Biden had won Arizona, being the first news outlet to make that important call and really putting a spoke in the wheel of Trump's effort to coast on the red mirage. Do we know what the red mirage is? It's the effect of people in 2020, Republican legislators, resolving to count mail-in votes later. During the height of COVID, when a lot of sane people were trying to reduce their exposure to other people and reduce their risk of contracting a disease that could have harmful effects and that they didn't have any vaccine for at that stage, and were using mail-in voting opportunities. So mail-in votes were disproportionately Biden voters because they took COVID seriously and were trying to avoid in-person voting. A larger number than usual of voters, mail-in voters that year, would have been Democratic voters voting for the man who would take the pandemic seriously, in contrast to Trump, who did not take the pandemic seriously, who was distributing taxpayer resources unevenly, who was sending PPE to red states disproportionately, and who in the early stages of the pandemic, when it was predominantly blue states affected, was really doubling down on his statements about the disease being a hoax and the pandemic being overinflated. So just checking something. Okay, so the red mirage is what happens when you count the in-person votes first. Even though the mail-in votes have been coming in for weeks, you just store them. You count the in-person votes first, and those votes during COVID are disproportionately comprised of Trump voters who believe Trump that the pandemic's overhyped, who have less concerns about voting in person and haven't availed themselves of mail-in voting, also because Trump said it was bad. It was a system that lent and enabled fraudulent vote theft and blah, blah, blah. So they were avoiding mail-in voting, even if they usually would have used this service. They were saying, oh no, Trump's assured me that's bad. I have a negative association with mail-in voting. I will vote in person. Trump cultivated that resolve on the part of his loyalist supporters in order to achieve that effect, a red mirage of an early vote dominated by Trump votes because in-person votes were counted first. And he had his appointee, Louis DeJoy, corrupt Postmaster General, who is still inexplicably in his position as Postmaster General, who worked hard to delay the votes, who decommissioned multiple million-dollar mail sorting machines in order to slow down the vote. But people worked to counteract those measures and worked to prioritize mail-in votes and helped at least mitigate some of the harm that the sabotage that Postmaster General Louis DeJoy did to the system of America's post mail-in voting. So the red mirage means votes for Trump were higher to start with, the percentages of votes counted, because the percentage of in-person votes for Trump were higher because the mail-in votes weren't counted first. And a lot of Republican legislators in Republican-governed states passed measures to say, count the mail votes last. Even the early mail-in votes, count them last. We'll count in-person votes first. That was done to enhance Donald Trump's ability to claim, look at me, I'm winning. Anything that changes, any proportional changes people report on that say, oh, more votes are coming in for Biden now, that's clearly theft. That's clearly a plot to steal the election from me. He had a system to sell this lie, the big lie. He had a system with so many components to it to enhance his prospects for stealing American democracy, to steal the election results from a majority of the American people, from American voters. All right, back to the NPR article. So, desperate to win back the Trump supporters, Fox News and the Fox Business Network turned at least a dozen times to a pro-Trump attorney named Sidney Powell, who, when pressed for evidence, forwarded a memo entitled Election Fraud Info to Fox anchor Maria Bartiromo. Bartiromo? Okay. Bartiromo hosted Powell on her Fox News show the day after receiving it. So what does this memo contain? Let's have a look. Let's read further. Okay, the author of the memo, in which Powell and Bartiromo put so much stock, offered detailed and utterly false claims of how Dominion voting systems helped rig the election for Biden. She also, the author of the memo, also shared a bit about herself, writing that she gains insights from experiencing something like time travel. Sorry, one quote. Like time travel in a semi-conscious state, end close quote. So the author of a memo who said she gains insights from basically astral projecting. She leaves her body. She's time traveling in a semi-conscious state. She's just maybe falling asleep to dream, and then these insights come to her. And then she writes a memo entitled, what was it entitled? I have to scroll up again, forget the title. Titled Election Fraud Info. Election fraud, she was falling asleep, but it came to her how the election was stolen from Trump. She had these insights. She put them in a memo, election fraud information. I'll send it to Sidney Powell, but let me also tell you that I gained these insights from experiencing something like time travel in a semi-conscious state. Very reliable, very sane, wonderful. So the existence, wait, no, sorry, more details, it's important. I'm skipping down a paragraph to say Powell's source also volunteered that the wind tells her she's a ghost, though she doesn't believe it. The woman, who is not named in Dominion's legal brief, wrote that she knew the late Supreme Court Justice Antonin Scalia had been killed in a week-long human hunting expedition at an elite social club. So that was another insight this woman gained, presumably from her time travel in a semi-conscious state. She had an insight that Scalia, who actually died in 2016 of a heart attack, according to local officials in Texas, no, according to her, it's not a heart attack. He was killed during a week-long human hunting expedition at an elite social club. So very QAnon type stuff is filtering through to this lady who presumably spends some time reading and watching QAnon spouting fellow kindred spirits on the internet, and then falls asleep, time travels in her semi-conscious state, and gets these insights that there was election theft, information theft, that she types out to Sidney Powell, who forwards this email to Fox host Maria Bartiromo, and they discuss it as if it's a source of the utmost integrity and reliability on Maria Bartiromo's Fox show that she hosts. Wow. The woman also asserted that the late Fox News chairman, Roger Ailes, and Fox Corporation founder Rupert Murdoch secretly huddle most days to determine how best to portray Mr. Trump as badly as possible. And by the time the woman wrote this memo, Ailes had been dead for more than 3 years. Dead for more than 3 years? Well, I'm sure that didn't stop him from huddling together with Rupert Murdoch to try and defame Donald Trump as efficiently as possible, because if there's anybody who's against Donald Trump, it was Fox and Fox owner Rupert Murdoch in 2020. I mean, now, honestly, I think Rupert Murdoch is a bit tired of Trump and, still trying to pander to his audience's proclivities as best possible, maximize profit, but help a Republican candidate win in 2024 so that he can, be a kingmaker and milk Republican representatives for as much tax cuts, subsidies, not tax cuts. I'm going to reframe that and call it tax breaks, tax gifts. Rupert Murdoch wants gifts of your money to make him feel good about himself. People are often very attached to their sense of superiority, and they will throw a bunch of people under the bus if they have no ethical system that guides their behavior. And Rupert Murdoch appears to not have any ethical system to guide his behavior. He is attached to his own wealth, increasing it, and lying for profit to members of his audience with an appetite for lies. So they're not just lied to, they have an appetite for certain truths that when they're told that what they believe is true, they will come back like little crack addicts over and over again, even when people around them, even when family members say, there's no proof, you're being lied to, there's in fact proof that the opposite is true. Why do you still watch Fox News when it lies to you? They're like, these lies feel real. I know it to be true. Therefore, it's not lies. How dare you? And they will cut off family members rather than listen to anybody intervening to try and help reattach them to reality. So, Okay, more quotes from the author of this important memo that Maria Bartiromo discussed on her show and gave absolute credence to. Not only did she assert that 3 years dead Roger Ailes and Fox Corporation founder Rupert Murdoch huddled every day to disparage Donald Trump, she also wrote, "Who am I? And how do I know all of this? I've had the strangest dreams since I was a little girl," the woman wrote in the email shared by Powell with Bartiromo and Dobbs. Oh, also Lou Dobbs knew about this. Great. Back to her quote, "I was internally decapitated, and yet I live." Okay, first of all, how can you be internally decapitated and not also externally decapitated? It's just a head removal. But anyway, on the inside of her body, on some level, she was internally decapitated, but she lives. That's lucky, because if she hadn't lived despite being decapitated, we never would have got this gem. And Fox News audience members would never have been treated to Sidney Powell and Maria Bartiromo discussing with absolute conviction this important source material on election theft information. This all appeared in the same memo that claimed Dominion software flipped votes from Trump to Biden and tied the election company to a conspiracy involving Democrats Nancy Pelosi and Senator Dianne Feinstein. So for people with an appetite for being lied to about Nancy Pelosi and Dianne Feinstein, what a coincidence. They're women. And when you lie about women to people who already have a prejudice against women in positions of power, then you have greater uptake. And they just wanted enough people to buy this, to make it plausible, to give it enough dignity so that other news outlets could report on it and say many Americans believe that the election was stolen. Why did they believe it? Did we lie to them and say, oh, a source has credibly reported to us that Dominion software flipped votes from Trump to Biden? Who wrote this? Oh, well, it wasn't a woman who said she's internally decapitated and yet lives, talks to the wind, time travels in a semi-conscious state, and is aware that a justice, former Supreme Court justice who died of a heart attack was actually human hunted, and that 3-year dead Roger Ailes huddles every day with Rupert Murdoch to disparage Donald Trump and figure out a strategy to defame him every day. That's not our source, is it? No, let's not talk about the source. It's a credible anonymous source. Well, thank you for that piece of extreme, unprincipled deceit practiced on a large segment of the American population. And it was a large segment. There are millions of people who watch Fox News, and there are millions of people who are part victimized and part volunteers to be lied to. They are willing accomplices in this mutually back-scratching civility to lies. Like a banana republic refers to a servile nation that serves under a unprincipled, exploitative elite oligarchy, or the oligarchs. The oligarchy is the system. The oligarchs are the head of the system. Okay, so some exploitative elites. In America, we have the Koch brothers. We have Rupert Murdoch. We have Robert Mercer. We have Peter Thiel. Billionaires without conscience or principle who use all the avenues possible to pervert America's systems, America's constitutional framework to their own advantage and counter to your advantage, to exploit workers, to exploit families, to exploit American society, to exploit the scaffolding of America's public education system, the strengths that America brings to the table as a nation, its education system, its roads, its and the elements of its culture that support invention and enterprise and welcome migrants and innovation. All of that framework that is what is good about America is exploited by those who yearn for a restoration of America's, the worst elements of America's past, the most exploitative elements of America's past, where extraordinary wealth was generated at the expense of the dignity, happiness, and lives of others. That people were bought and sold as chattel slaves, and that people's labor was stolen from them without recompense, without any fair recompense or any recompense at all. All my pumpkins are home and I'm going to have to go, but it was delightful talking to you all. Thank you to any replay viewers. If you enjoyed this broadcast, I thrive on encouragement. Please feel free to tell me what you liked about it or what you'd like to see more of. And I look forward to another broadcast in the near future and to completing this article I'm trying to work on. Bye, everyone. Preach. Crack addicts indeed. Yes. You are welcome.